Welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another edition of Avalara's bi-weekly webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impact on trade compliance. We started this weekly series and now bi-weekly back in February. If it's your first time, welcome. If you've joined us before, welcome back. Just a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review. We're recording today's event and you'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. And there are several ways to engage with presenters and attendees today. First, if you have any questions, be sure to place them into the Q&A box. That way our speaker will see them and we'll be able to answer. We'll save time for some Q&A at the end and we'll get to as many as we can. You can also submit your troubleshooting questions there in the Q&A box and we'll take a look at those and try to help you as best we can. Second, you can join our attendee chat. Just click the icon at the bottom of your screen with the two chat bubbles. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking on the emoji icon. Since this session is probably a little less than an hour and intended to be interactive and responsive, it is not eligible for CPE credit. All right, just a quick reminder that we do have some locations coming up for Crush on Tour. We have Dallas this week, actually, and then later on in the month, we have Atlanta. So if you'd like to check out the details for that, just go to events.avalara.com. And then here is a quick reminder on our upcoming bi-weekly now. I know I've said that a lot of times, but we've switched to a bi-weekly format. And of course, if we have anything that pops up, we'll be sure to get that out to you. But this is our bi-weekly calendar for the rest of the year. All right, let's take a moment and meet our presenter. We have Shane Bogdan here solo today, Director of Sales for Cross Border at Avalara. And he's going to hold down the entire webinar for us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Shane to get us started.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Regina. And pleasure to have everybody, new faces, new members joining us, and folks that have been joining us back since February. So my name's Shane Bogdan. I'm our Director of Cross-Border Sales here. I am running solo today on this whole piece. And as some background, we have several folks from our team that are actually currently at the Universal Postal Union Postal Congress. So that happens every 4 years. Currently, right now, it's happening in Dubai, and it's on some exciting news from our side of the spectrum with Avalara and Cross Border that we were recently announced our acceptance to the UPU Consultative Committee. So we were selected and have accepted. So a majority of the team, a good number of folks, are currently in Dubai right now, holding it down, meeting with the UPU and the Consultative Committee on this. So I will be your presenter today, walking through. I'll try to get to as many questions as we can here. You know, with one person, we have Marty Taffet behind the scenes also helping answer questions, but we'll get through the latest and greatest. So our agenda remains the same that we have across the board that we've been doing, you know, the past 20 plus weeks. We'll walk through the latest news that's been happening, implications of your business, and how Avalara can help. But we'll kick it off as normal with a poll question here. So what is the current total duty, taxes, and fees collected in 2025 year-to-date, according to the latest CBP trade statistics? And if you've been following us over the past several weeks, this may be an underhand pitch to you, but let's see what everybody comes up with at the moment. All right, I'm not sure if anybody has actually voted yet here. But if you haven't, I'll give the answer away. It's 136 billion. We'll go into some trade stats in a little bit. The $88 billion number was all of what CBP collected last year, duty, taxes, and fees from cross-border trade in 2024. And year to date, we're currently at 136 billion. So more to come on this as we go through here. So we'll dive into the latest news on trade and tariffs here, and probably the first one that's really hit the wire over the past 48 hours is really in relation to the reciprocal tariffs and the annexes that are out there. So over the past 6+ months, we've been having there's been new items being added to lists that are being hit with additional tariffs. Well, now the administration's actually taking a step back here, basically identifying some specific items that are eligible for exemption. But there's some caveats here. So basically, a trading partner must conclude a deal with the U.S. that helps mitigate the national emergency related to trade and deficit. So at first, as part of this, the first round here, reading the White House FAQs on this, a lot of it is bullion-related articles, critical minerals, some pharmaceutical products, and things pending Section 232 investigations. But they're looking at potential adjustments to this. And some of the additional ones are certain aircraft and auto parts, general pharmaceuticals ingredients, natural resources that are really unavailable within the U.S., and certain agricultural products. Now, since last night, another round of news came out specifically on this, that there's even the potential of goods such as coffee, tea, tropical fruits, wood, nuts, spices, etc. They could also potentially be removed from some of these other countries, tariff eligibility from some of these other countries, under the condition that they have a good enough offer on the table for the U.S. So, there's obviously some negotiating that's going on here between these countries, but looks like there's some leeway for additional exemptions on some critical goods that potentially that the U.S. doesn't have access to developing and manufacturing within the country. So the next one here is Japan. I'm not sure if we talked about this on the last one. What Japan has now agreed to, basically a 15% baseline tariff. This was previously 24% as part of the August 7th. It's now going to be at 15%, and that also is retroactive back to the August 7th date, and also includes autos and parts on there as well, capped at 15%. So this is actually a pretty significant one. Again, they were at 24%, but now the U.S. is putting them at 15%. It's almost kind of similar to the EU deal that is currently out there right now, the 15% max across the board here. And the EU is also eliminating some tariffs on specific industrial goods. So Japan and EU, we're seeing some pretty solid progress in terms of what's happening from a negotiation standpoint and seeing those tariffs lower. India has been increased to 50%. The IEEPA tariffs were 25%. And then there was additional 50% on top of that due to the administration basically saying their correspondence with Russia and oil. So that is currently at 50% as of August 27th. Canada has reeled back, I believe, around 50% of the tariffs that they had on U.S. goods, basically anything on USMCA qualifying U.S. goods. But we do still have tariffs on Canada currently at 35%. We'll go through that in a second. And then obviously the biggest thing that's changed really since the last webinar is in relation to CBP and the end of de minimis. On May 2nd, we removed de minimis eligibility for all goods coming in from China and Hong Kong. As of August 29th, we removed our eligibility for any de minimis parcels coming in from any other countries, even outside of China and Hong Kong. So we'll dive into that a little bit more because that's obviously been making a ripple across the markets and definitely a key talking point right now at the UPU Postal Congress that's happening. So here are some of the frameworks and here are some of the deals that are currently in place right now. We're constantly updating these pieces. So obviously Canada is 35%, except for any goods that are not eligible for USMCA. Mexico is at 25%, but there is a proposed 30% on the table. They're currently in a 90-day window in there right now, which it could increase to 30% after that. Brazil is at 50%, and there's some goods on there in terms of Brazil where the tariffs combined are about 76% and north of that number, such as beef. So again, they were another one at 25%. Excuse me, they were at 25%. Then they increased by another 40%. And then as we've been talking about, all of these things are stackable. So if there's other tariffs that were previously in play here, it adds up. So that's how currently right now, Brazil, just for the example of beef in this matter, 76% tariff on beef coming into the United States. India at the 50%, China currently at a 30%, which is going to be reviewed by November 10th. So we'll I'll keep moving this forward, and we've been updating this slide since I would say probably April. Just the movement of everything that was announced on the White House Rose Garden as part of Liberation Day. You can see what the original proposed reciprocal tariffs were in the yellow here. Here are the ones that were adjusted as part of those August 7th dates, or any prior negotiations as part of those pieces. Some of these blue ones you can see here are the ones that actually were increased, such as Brazil, Canada up to 35%, obviously zero if it's eligible for USMCA. Same thing with Mexico. The other ones that have increased, really Switzerland as well, 39%. So I know there's some active negotiations on those. Anything in pink is where there's been some additional conversations between the markets, and those have been reduced. But we are up to date on our website. These slides are available after the webinar, so you can actually go on here. You can click on the link on our reciprocal tariffs explained, and also see an up-to-date chart of all of the tariffs that are currently in play, what the rates are, etc. And just to go through some of the major markets here, the first three major markets as part of this whole trade and tariff whiplash, what we originally called it, were really China, Canada, and Mexico. They were the three countries that were, I will say, in the crosshairs here. So China, as I mentioned before, it's on a 90-day pause. It's on a pause until November 10th. But that said, it's currently sitting at a 30%. You also, though, have to think about the whole stacking component of things. 30% on top of whatever else, Section 301, Section 232, any other tariffs that are currently applicable to China in those specific goods, adding the additional 30% on top of it. Canada currently sits at 35%, Mexico at 25%, and it is slated to go up to 30% after this 90-day period. Some other major trading partners here, across the board, it's 10% in all countries that were not part of that original list of 50-plus countries announced back on April 2nd. The UK, they have probably one of the best deals, cut with the US, really 10% across the board here. And 25% on steel and aluminum. And again, if you've been following us, steel and aluminum currently right now for markets outside of the UK sits at 50% here. So the UK was able to really come to a pretty solid deal, 10% on exports, and then 10% on the first 100,000 vehicles coming into the US. So again, kind of a sweetheart deal for the UK on what they were able to negotiate. The EU has been reduced to 15%, as I mentioned on some of our previous slides. Japan down to 15%, as well as on auto and parts. Vietnam down to 20%. And then on the other side of the coin, you have, the increase that we were going through. Brazil up to 50%, even higher as you start stacking. Switzerland 39%, India 50%. And then looking at it more specific to, specific industries, materials, tariffs, et cetera, 25%. This is kind of the one that we continue to have on these bullets week over week. We actually don't know how they're assessing these on this 25% on countries that buy oil or gas from Venezuela, but this has been in place since April 2nd. The 50%, as I mentioned, which was originally 25%, and now bumped up to 50% as of June 1st, I believe, for steel and aluminum, 25% on automobiles. Most recently on the additional materials here was 50% on copper. So you can kind of see these additional ones outside of just the direct correlation of a specific market on these specific goods. And these primarily fall into the more Section 232 tariffs versus the general IEEPA tariffs, which are really impacting the markets as a whole. Now, you've probably heard us talk about how CBP has really gotten on top of their game in terms of publicizing, number one, making sure that they are cracking down and putting any communications out in terms of if you're doing any nefarious activity or labeling goods that are country of origin to a lower market to avoid taxes. They are specifically going after and enforcing these things. But they've also started putting out a lot of material in relation to what is the current state of trade, what is the current state of tariffs. The left-hand side here, again, you can go to the link sheet. This was just publicized last week. So it is new tariff requirements on a majority of the major markets here. It also then provides details into, steel, aluminum, copper, things that we've been reporting on for the past, several months here. And then there's additional resources that are clearly coming out in relation to the market right now in terms of what countries are having the highest tariff. You can see Brazil, India right there, what we were just talking about in terms of the high tariff rate here. So the biggest news that's really hit the wire, since August 29th and even before, I want to say you heard it here first, is that obviously de minimis was part of this whole crosshair piece. 125 million parcels entered the U.S. under de minimis in 2015. Fast forward to last year, is 1.36 billion parcels entering the U.S. under de minimis. A majority of those were coming in from China. So that equated to about 4 million parcels a day coming in from under de minimis. Now, this has always been a bipartisan piece. There were several bills that were actually put into Congress last year from the Biden administration on how do we reduce, how do we eliminate de minimis, basically because of these safety concerns around not being able to keep up with 1.36 billion parcels. And on top of that, the whole fentanyl piece. Again, that was part of this whole China, Canada, Mexico crosshair at the beginning of this. So May 2nd, basically the U.S. has put in play that they were going to remove de minimis from any parcels coming in China and Hong Kong. And then August 29th, again, I feel like, we can say you kind of heard it here first. There was a lot of rumblings in between that right after the Big Beautiful Bill Act that basically said that de minimis was going to be removed by July 2027. Obviously, fast forward to basically being cut by August 29th, 2025. So last week, a week and a half ago now. This has really caused some challenges right now, and it's a big talking point. As I mentioned, currently with the UPU right now, and some quick stats here that I'm going to bring up is. One senior administration official noted that inbound de minimis volume dropped from that 4 million parcels daily down to 1 million parcels due to that May change, specifically targeted to China and Hong Kong parcels. Now, some other ones that came out more recently from the UPU, basically there's a couple different ways that are happening here. Now, anything that's related and coming in to the U.S. from a parcel standpoint is going to need collection, remittance of duties. There's also different formalities here in terms of what those fees are going to be versus if you shipped with a standard courier, FedEx, DHL, some of these other ones versus a postal component of things. So the UPU just came out with these stats that UPU member countries' postal volume to the U.S. was down 81% on August 29th versus the prior Friday. So an 81% drop. And on top of that, because of these postal pieces that they need to collect, calculate, and remit these duties specifically to the CBP, 88 postal operators have informed the UPU that they've suspended some sort of postal service to the U.S. until really some sort of solution is implemented. Now, the CBP has designated 12 qualified parties to help international postal carriers with the whole collection remittance piece. There are several nuances to those pieces, but the CBP has basically targeted 12 parties to help out on that front for the collection and remittance of duties to the CBP. But obviously this is causing headaches. I mean, 88 of the global postal operators out there, I believe out of 176 have basically suspended these things. So a lot is very impactful right now. So anything that is coming into the United States is going to receive, does have to have duties collected on it, remitted to it. On top of that, they also need an HS code that's being submitted to the CBP as well for inbound processing. So, our whole theme all year has been how do you be proactive versus reactive on these things? And two of the core components that we've always talked about is the duty rate, understanding what that specific duty rate is going to be, and providing that transparency to an end consumer. Very critical in this instance. We're going into peak right now. You want to make sure if you're an international seller selling to your U.S. Market, you're providing those costs and transparency up front But on top of that, you're going to need an HS classification code to ensure that you're up to the most regulatory standards, so you're not getting dinged with fees or rejected parcels as it comes through. We could talk further about that, but we wanted to illustrate some of these implications and some of these stats really that are coming in overnight, and even from organizations such as the UPU. Now, when it comes to some other trade statistics, we've been showing this. The CBP has continued to put these things in motion in terms of illustrating how much duties, taxes, and these other revenue streams they're actually collecting since all of this started back in early February. I think February 1st, with China being the first one. This goes back to our first poll question that there was 136 year-to-date $1 billion collected. Again, compare that to 2024. It was $88 billion collected from these pieces. So everything that you see on here illustrated in orange here is specific to all of these new IEEPA tariffs, Section 232 tariffs on specific goods that have come into place here since the beginning of this year. These are revenue streams that we were never collecting on before, and now obviously we are collecting on this now. So this is going to be really interesting. I see somebody put something in here. What happens to the appeals court at the Supreme Court? I will touch base on that in a second. We actually have an updated slide specifically on that, Linda. So stay tuned here. But I think that's a major question a lot of folks have. Now, going back to the original, two of the original three that were in the crosshairs of the U.S. was specific around Canada and Mexico here. We've mentioned this a couple times, but if we think about the impact of USMCA, and this USMCA was put together in 2020, basically a free trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Anything that is being imported in the United States coming in from Mexico or coming in from Canada does not have to adhere to those 35% tariffs or those 25% tariffs, for example, coming in from Mexico. And a pretty interesting stat from RBC, this was going back to July, I believe they put the last report out on, was that previously 38% of Canadian exports coming into the US were designated as USMCA into the US. So 38% of goods coming in from Canada to the US were basically eligible for USMCA, only 38%. But as of the end of June, that has gone up to 92%. So if you are, a manufacturer or anybody in these countries, we highly recommend you go through the proper steps to understand, do your goods qualify for USMCA? This is low-hanging fruit if you're doing anything from a regional value content, primarily within US, Canada, Mexico, and importing, exporting within those three markets, to basically waiver any sort of additional tariffs that are as part of these and qualify as USMCA. There's really 6 kind of primary steps here that need to go into the whole certification process. I'll quickly highlight them. Number 1 is determine the eligibility of goods. Are they wholly obtained within US, Canada, and Mexico? Do they hit specific standards? There's about 9 data elements that are needed in order to basically put in an application for this. So type details, exporter details, production details, descriptions of goods, origin criteria. Then there's a certification process. Now, it's not a prescribed format, but the CBP basically has a suggested template on their website that you can go through and input these sorts of pieces of information. Then there's parts on, do your goods qualify for exemptions for these pieces? Then a lot of this is all about submitting and maintaining all of this information. So, at the beginning, you're verifying eligibility, you're collecting all these data pieces. Well, in order to stay USMCA eligible, you have to continue to maintain all of that data so it's easily available. So if you have any questions around this, we highly recommend the best sources that are out currently right now on this are, if you go to the CBP website, or if you're in Canada, on the CBSA website, they have a plethora of information specifically to how do you get certified for USMCA, which questions around it, et cetera. So highly recommend that. And on the heels of USMCA, we're really in this the 6-year frame here. So I mentioned earlier, USMCA came into place in 2020. It goes for a 6-year time span. So already steps are underway to basically renegotiate and review currently right now as we go into 2026 on what's happening. So from a U.S. perspective, all of this goes through the U.S. Trade representative. So they have to hold public hearings, et cetera. And there's been some talk that U.S. is moving quicker with this. It's actually USMCA. They're within the United States. The U.S. has to have a mandatory joint review, like 270 days prior to the expiration date on this. So U.S. is basically not accelerating this. We're basically on the time span of having these reviews currently 270 days before the review, which means the talks within the U.S. are going to be starting within October. Now, Canada has already been in talks going back to May. They've had a standing committee on the international trade within their House of Commons. They started doing these pretty comprehensive studies back in May 25. They have a lot of input from stakeholders, businesses, unions. And, as we mentioned here, Mexico is really seeking accelerated review as well, just because of the impact that these tariffs and trades have on them year to date. So I'm sure with the U.S. now kicking off these discussions, Canada well ahead on these pieces as well, I'm sure over the course of the next few months, in the next quarter, we're going to be hearing a lot on this, which we'll absolutely report out to the group here as we learn more. So as Linda had a question here, what happens to the appeals court ruling if Supreme Court does not rule on the appeal prior to August 4th or October 14th? So great question. We'll give some color here for folks that haven't been following along in terms of what is even going on with the Court of International Trade. But basically back in May 28th, the court of a select group of businesses basically took a case to the Court of International Trade and said basically, hey, these IEEPA tariffs, how does the executive branch have the power to basically put these into play here and basically say mandatory rulings that there's duties, that these tariffs and duties across all these countries impacting my business? Because normally with some of these other trade measures, they have to go through certain trade representatives, they have to go through Congress. Whereas IEEPA is basically the executive branch just basically said, hey, here's blanket tariffs across the board here. So some businesses took this to the Court of International Trade. On May 28th, the Court of International Trade said that these IEEPA tariffs basically exceeded any sort of power that group had. The following day, though, the Federal Circuit Appeals Court basically granted a temporary stay of these. And then between May 29th and July 31st, everything has been status quo, and it still is currently at this moment. There were oral arguments that happened on July 31st. And then most recently, on August 29th, there was a 7-4 vote by the U.S. Court of Appeals Federal Circuit that basically said that they're not authorized, the executive orders are not authorized by IEEPA of basically having these tariffs. And they basically said they concluded that they're not. So the administration is basically trying to fast track this whole piece and have the Supreme Court rule, does that branch and does this power allow for these IEEPA tariffs to come into play here? And currently everything is status quo until October 14th, in which they would be reverted unless the Supreme Court rules against these pieces. What's been very interesting, and probably to Linda's point here, what if the Supreme Court rules that does not rule on this prior? Most recently this weekend on Meet the Press, Scott Pessett, the Treasury Secretary, was on NBC's Meet the Press, and he basically said, and he specifically said that if the Supreme Court rules that tariffs imposed through IEEPA are illegal, then, quote unquote, we would have to give a refund on about half of the tariffs, which he said would then be terrible for the Treasury. So this is going to be very interesting over the following weeks on what actually happens with the Supreme Court. If we go back in time, back in June, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary for the administration, said, tariffs are not going away. If the federal appeals moves these away, Donald Trump has so many other authorities that even in a weird and unusual circumstance where this was taken away, we would just bring on another or another tariff and go through a variety of angles. So if you also think about this from a political standpoint and talk about these other mechanisms to get tariffs in place, Section 232, 301s, it is a Republican-controlled House and Senate, so they can easily fast-track some bills. They could reimpose the same tariffs through other legislation channels through a few weeks to a couple months to get these back in place. So this is going to sit with the Supreme Court right now to understand how this rules out. There's been a lot of things out there right now of how do I recapture my duties if I've already submitted these as part of the IEEPA pieces. I think this, it's going to be interesting how this all comes into play here. But more to come on this over the coming weeks. Obviously, this is with the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens on this moving forward. So implications to your business, we've always talked about, the four global pieces of trade. We call them the four horsemen of global trade, which is de minimis exceptions. Obviously, currently right now, if you're sending anything to the United States under that $800, that is all suspended. So the goal here is always understanding what are your de minimis exemptions going in, not only to the US, but if you're in the US, selling and shipping to other markets, just because there's different exception criteria and thresholds there. Country of origin, which is basically tying these IEEPA rates across the board here, it's impactful to know what is the country of origin, where is substantial transformation happening, and having that across the board of where are those goods being manufactured, because the US is tying it specifically to the country of origin. So if you have a good coming in from China and you're warehousing it in the UK and fulfilling it to the US from the UK, country of origin is still Chinese. You would need to be paying those rates of the 30% plus because it's coming in from China. Tariff code classification, I'm sure all of you have heard us say this before. We classify this really as the Rosetta Stone of trade, taking a unique 6 to 10 digit unique identifier across every item that can then be tied to the country of origin in order to get the specific duty rate and any other eligibility qualifications on those. So the US, as all of these things that are coming into play here, the Section 232s, the IEEPA tariffs, the United States has a Federal Registrar website. They take and they code all of the products to those specific HS classification codes, and they put them on there. And this is what our whole organization does, is we're monitoring these specific pieces, ensuring classification codes with all of our clients, and ensuring that all ties to the Federal Registrar, and also at a global landscape across all other countries as well, if they have specifically their own designated Federal Registrars. And then you take all these pieces and you look at what is the declared value, monetary value of those goods. Then you're taking and applying those specific duty rates, tariff rates, et cetera, to getting that specific monetary value. So these are all the key pieces here in order that we've been saying, be proactive, less being reactive, get all of your data and information together. Potentially this could even help you out when you're going to the CBP or the CBSA in order to get any sort of eligibility in relation to USMCA. So every week we've been talking about, what are some other, key stats in the markets on what other businesses and industries are feeling, the whole designation with trade and tariffs here. So here's some new ones here. Lululemon basically cut its outlook. They're expecting about 240 million in tariffs due to the removal of de minimis this year and about 320 next year. And, if you double click on that, 2/3 of Lululemon's orders are actually fulfilled from Canada. So that 240 and 320 number, that's really based upon, there's no de minimis eligibility now for goods that are being imported from Canada unless they qualify for USMCA. So these goods, 2/3 of orders, Lululemon's orders coming into the United States are fulfilled from Canada. They're expecting that to be about 240 million in tariffs this year. As part of this, the other one is the Coach and Kate Spade. They said that they're expecting around $160 million tariff impact here. And obviously this is going to now impact what a supply chain strategy looks like. Where are you manufacturing these goods? Where are you fulfilling these goods from? How do you become smarter on these pieces? Or how do you just start adjusting your supply chain to find other countries where they have a lower tariff rate for imports into the United States? So this is very critical. And again, it goes back to understanding the four components of detailed information that we had. Now, there's some other companies out there that are celebrating this. Urban Outfitters there is basically saying this can only help. Five Below shared a similar assessment. And if you think Five Below, I mean, obviously these are all goods that are very low in price, under that $800 previously. And then also, one that was really impacted was Forever 21. If you think about fast fashion, the owner of that Simon Properties was basically saying, they wish this had taken place sooner, as it could have, impacted the outcome of Forever 21, which was basically on the path of bankruptcy. So some interesting, dual sides of the coin here of, how are some going to be impacted by the whole de minimis change, while other companies that have been impacted by these fast fashion, potentially, Asian marketplaces, sending goods in for the past 2 years, under that de minimis loophole, under that, not a loophole, but under that de minimis framework. So I believe we covered this on the last one, but Goldman Sachs basically came out a couple weeks ago really on who is covering the tariff costs. Really what this is illustrating on the left-hand versus the right-hand side of the short term on how consumers, it's a low cost on consumers at the current moment, but this is really going to be transitioning the cost of these tariffs to the consumer. So they're saying right now about 22% of tariff costs are absorbed by consumers. They're expecting that to then go up to 67%. And at the current state right now, they're saying about 64% of that, the tariffs are being taken on by the businesses, and then eventually going to then the business is going to be taking on 10% of that. But again, this goes back to, okay, well, really the businesses are taking these tariffs up front as everybody is trying to understand these pieces. But then if you look at the 67% and 10%, these essentially are going to be then moved from the businesses to the consumers. So it's definitely something, these metrics are always coming out. I still think we're early in part of these pieces, especially now with de minimis being reduced. That's going to also impact a lot of this. So more to come on what these are saying, but initial projections and forecasts here that are, most businesses are going to be passing these on to the buyers. Some other new stats that are out there, this specifically is coming in from the UN reports. Basically, the left-hand illustration here is saying which markets are going to be most impacted because of these tariffs. They're saying that China is going to have a $156 billion trade impact due to the tariffs currently at play. EU looks like to be the second one they're projecting. And then the third one here, I believe it's going to be, they're kind of stating Japan. So I don't know if the Japan piece, if this came before or after the 15% that was recently agreed upon and that lowering rate here, but these are some initial projections on how it's going to impact those specific markets. And you may have seen a statistic out there right now that the average tariff rate is around 18%. This is looking at this from a short-term standpoint and a long-run standpoint. So, metals, if you've been following along with this, metals, steel, aluminum, copper, currently the tariff rate on those is 50%. So short run here, they're averaging these out to around 41% with the inclusion of other metals here, clothing at a variety of ranges, just because a majority of clothing is manufactured by a majority of other regions outside of the US. Then it's looking at this from a long run perspective of what is the increase going to do and what substitutions are going to play to basically average these things down and out. So again, I know a lot of economists and a lot of nations are going to be really trying to put their finger on the pulse here of how impacted are they and what is this doing really from a consumer standpoint and a business standpoint of these tariffs and rates that are coming across the board. So 5 proactive steps, we've always been talking about this whole piece here of, number one is diversification of shipping carriers and support sources of supply. Obviously with de minimis now, if you're a retailer or if you're a shipper sending parcels to the US, previously by postal, it may make sense for you right now to switch over to a courier, a major courier, just because of the fact that 88 of the 176 have basically suspended shipment. So always understanding what sort of diversification you need to have. Same thing goes with sources of supply. which markets have a lower tariff rate that can benefit you and help cut costs, automating global trade compliance, understanding all these trade regulation rules, HS classification pieces. You don't have to do that alone or do it by hand. It's amazing the amount of companies that we talk to that have all been doing this by hand, by ledger. You don't have to do that by hand. There's partners like us that are out there that can do this all for you, make you faster and more agile when it comes to, number one, understanding the diversification aspect of things. Working with a customs broker and trade attorney, I mean, you know, we can't advise on this enough. You're most likely already working with a customs broker, but a lot of questions sometimes that we see really should be geared more towards a customs broker or trade attorney. This is just so critical in terms of interpretation across the board right now. This goes back to the four horsemen. Number 4 is part of the four horsemen piece here of, you know, what is the ensuring product details are compliant with global trade regulations. Understand those four horsemen. Are your products under eligibility for de minimis if you're selling or shipping to other markets? Do you have an HS classification code? What are the country of origins? What are other origins that are also in your trade and supply mix? What are your declared values? So having these things up front helps out with number 1 and number 2 here. And then building inventory and absorbing short-term headwinds. We were seeing a lot of this happen really May, June, and July. When we were seeing, you know, a lot of freight coming in from Shanghai to LA to basically build that short-term headwinds, all these under de minimis parcels, the pause on China for the 90-day or until November 10th. You're seeing a lot of this inventory come in, and a lot of if you're following the warehouse market right now, it's extremely hard to get space out there in order to help maintain all of these pieces. So a lot of folks have been maintaining and building this inventory ahead of time before these duties actually came into play or under de minimis. So we'll go to poll question number 2. The next 2 we've been asking all the time because we're collecting this data and understanding what trends really are out there in terms of what decision-making things are happening at the moment. So are you planning to adjust your supply chain due to impending global trade regulations, duties, tariffs, regulation changes in the following ways? Feel free to select more than one on these. This is one of our OG questions that we've been answering asking since day one. It's been pretty amazing to see some of the trends on this. I think we don't have the historic trend on this on today's session, but we'll pull this out. I think on the next session it would be helpful to see here. So diversifying suppliers and manufacturers, rethinking distribution strategies. I don't know yet. It's funny because, I don't know yet, I think used to be around 60%. We're seeing that come down. Still 40% seems, pretty high. Unfortunately, we're no longer in the kind of wait and see period. A lot of these tariffs are primarily all in play. So a decision should be kind of happening and thinking about which ways you're going to be pivoting your pieces here. But diversifying suppliers and manufacturers, switching to local suppliers, and diversification of distribution strategies. So great commentary there. Thanks for all those who participated in that one. Poll question 3 here, more so in relation to kind of that Goldman Sachs piece that we were saying of how are you addressing these global tariffs? Are you going to be passing these on to your customers? Are you going to be eating those? Are you going to be including a tariff surcharge as part of that transaction? So I'd love to see where everybody's at currently on this. Based upon other reports out there and historic findings that we've seen, we have an idea here. So let's see where everybody is at. Passing on it, well, I think this is probably the largest one here of 75%. We appreciate the honesty that you're going to be passing these on to the consumer, probably by raising prices. Okay, so this is interesting because you're not just including the surcharge, you're just going to include this into the actual price of the good. Nobody is absorbing the tariff cost. Again, it kind of goes hand in hand with these reports that are coming out that businesses are now really going to be pushing these then onto the consumer. So keeping up with these changes, obviously, as part of this whole piece, we don't want businesses to be hit with penalties, fines, delays. You don't want to be overcharging, undercharging custom and duty and import taxes, especially if you're selling from an international market into the U.S. Now that the minimis is gone, and we go in the holidays, you want to make sure that you're calculating the applicable duties up front, and that full transparency. and also understanding are there added costs for, as part of your supply chain. So this is not a loan piece. We worked with Thomson Reuters back in November of last year, and 55% that said that, transacting cross-border, it's, 55% said it's one of the biggest environmental business challenges out there. I mean, this number has to be through the roof by the time we redo this report again. So, the ways Avalara can help on here, and if you're new to this thing, think of Avalara cross-border really as kind of 3 C's here. The first is duty and tax calculation, understanding that your product set and understanding that you're providing those transparency and calculating the applicable duties, whether to show it to the international consumer, presenting it at checkout, or just having it for your own information to make really serious decision-making pieces as part of your supply chain. The second one here, tariff code classification, again, one of the other key 4 horsemen here of having that 6 to 10-digit HS classification code assigned to all products. US is requiring that now on all of these inbound parcels. Other countries have already been requiring this piece, but it is so critical to have this on hand. We provide a variety of services from a team of 250 individuals that go line item by line item, highest level of accuracy to automated real-time classification and self-serve tools, which we'll showcase in a minute. And then content, trade content. Are there PGAs? Are there restrictions on these goods? Other things you should know about as you're looking to readjust your supply chain. So we can help out with all of these pieces. Avalara for the past 20 years has always been focused on compliance. With cross-border, it's no different. We want to make sure that you have the right tools in hand to make sure that you're making the right decisions and not getting hit with those penalties, fines, reduction in consumers, abandoned carts, et cetera. So we can absolutely help out here. And then, Regina, I'm going to pass this over to you just so I don't screw this one up. If you want to just play a demo of our self-serve HS classification tool for the folks here. And we are offering this for a 14-day trial.
Welcome to the Avalara Tariff Content Classification Tool demo. Take a tour to see how Avalara can help your business's global trade compliance. First, choose the country of import. In our example, we will use the US. Click to proceed. Next, select the country of origin. In our example, we will use China. Click to proceed. Next, let's describe our product. Click to proceed. Now, we are ready to classify. Click to proceed. The tariff classification tool needs to know a few more details. Click to select the upper material. Select the lower material. Click to proceed. We've now reached an HS6. Click to drill down to reach the HS10. Since our product is a men's golf shoe, click to drill down. Since our product is not welt footwear, click to drill down. We have reached the HS8. Click to find the HS10. We have now reached our HS10. Click to see rate description. Here, we can see the total duty amount for this product. This totals 28.5% for the general rate, plus 10% for the preferential and additional duty rate, which totals 38.5%. This concludes the demo. Want to talk with an expert about your global trade compliance? Schedule time with a member of our cross-border team below for a live demo.
Perfect. Thanks, Regina. So we've been offering this up for the past few months now, basically a 14-day trial. I'll go to the next slide here, and if you select yes, our team will follow up with you within the next 24 to 48 hours. And basically your trial would start on this the coming Monday here for 14 days on this. So I'll give this a second right now. And then I will go to our next one. If you'd like to speak with an Avalara trade expert, please select yes. We will get back to you within 24 hours to follow up on this piece. But just while we're on this, I'm going to go through some of these questions that I see. Jamie said, I assume a Supreme Court ruling would not have an impact on de minimis removal. I don't believe so. I haven't seen anything about anything out there in relation to the de minimis piece. This has all been based upon the whole IEEPA tariffs across the board. This even predates this urgency around the removal of de minimis. Catherine, can importers get a refund if the courts determine that the additional tariffs were illegal? If so, what should importers do? This is a great question that, obviously Scott Passett said that, they will, what do you say here? We would have to give a refund about half of the tariffs, which would be terrible for the Treasury. I don't know what process that would take place. I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of insight coming out. I know this is a big question right now as folks are trying to understand. What I would say is make sure if you're capturing all of the fees that have been previously paid, make sure that you have those captured in some sort of file. And then are those reciprocal tariffs August 7th inclusive of previous duties on top of the original duties? So these are stackable. In some cases, I think with Japan, they may not be. I think Japan is that 15% across the board here. But if you look at China and some of these other places, it's not just a flat percent. Even like Brazil, we mentioned here. The August 7th is really going to be the baseline IEEPA tariffs. And then anything else that is as part of that is stackable. So if there are 301s, if there are other 232s on there, if there's any other ones, MFNs, they are stackable. So it's not as, unfortunately, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, I'm going to be paying 15%. That's why we're always recommending folks to, partner with us on these pieces. And we have the latest trade content calculations, and we can actually go SKU item across the line here that will provide you with the best accuracy that you can get on what that rate should be. So we have, I think that's it. We have one more question. This will give people a heads up. Yeah, I think we're all set on this piece. The other piece that I just want to mention is I will be at Atlanta. I know Regina had mentioned previously we're doing our crush across the country event. Dallas is on the 11th. So George Tranis, who's previously been part of these, he is going to be in Atlanta on the September 11th, in Dallas on September 11th. And then I'm going to be, I believe, on August 25th at our Atlanta session as well, also giving cross-border talks and discussions. So if you're in Dallas or if you're in Atlanta, please reach out. Would love to have you attend. Connect with you, et cetera. And we always appreciate all the folks that are watching us here and then meeting them face to face. We've had some really amazing conversations with folks that have watched us on a weekly basis here. So thank you to all, but just to let you know, Dallas on the 11th and 25th of September in Atlanta. All right, Regina, back to you.
All right, thanks, Jane. So just to take us out here, just a couple of ending housekeeping notes. We've got some references here on this slide for you. We've also got the global trade glossary that is included in the deck. We have our upcoming webinars listed here for you, and you can go to avalara.com/webinars to register for any that are upcoming. We do have a lot of additional webinars that are going to be live sometime in the next couple weeks for October, so keep an eye out for that. And I think it was Diana who pointed out to me that on one of our earlier slides noting all of the biweekly Trade and Tariff Tuesday webinars, we did have the wrong date. So I have corrected that, and I will upload, I'll swap out the PDF just in case you're saving that for yourself. But it is correct online. All right, that's all we have time for today. It looks like we don't have any other questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for Shane for holding it down by himself today. And hopefully we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks all.